Who is the most overrated person in history? Henry Ford. In business, engineering, and manufacturing, he's revered like a god. Professors like to gloss over his overwhelming anti-Semitism. Ford wrote and published a wildly anti-Semitic newspaper, which was spread around the Ford Motors facilities. Those papers were republished in Germany and became incredibly popular with the Third Reich. Heinrich Himmler described Ford as one of our most valuable, important, and witty fighters. He praised Ford in Mein Kampf and referred to Ford as an inspiration. The admiration went both ways, because Ford was a sympathizer to the highest degree, hosting his representatives in his home and hobnobbing with officers. On his 75th birthday, he was awarded the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest medal Germany could bestow on an American. But all anyone cares about are his effing assembly lines, which he didn't even invent. The assembly line idea actually came from ransom yields. Douglas MacArthur was obsessed with his legacy while being a far less capable leader than many of the other overlooked commanders in the Pacific Theater. He spent thousands of lives in battles on islands that had little strategic significance, declared the battle for the Philippines over while intense fighting raged on, and was disliked by many serving under him. Go listen to Read Max Hastings' Retribution, the battle for Japan, for a great deep dive into the Pacific War. My grandpa had a story about MacArthur. He didn't like him very much, so grandpa was stationed somewhere in the Philippines and MacArthur was scheduled to spend an extended visit at their base. Now, MacArthur traveled everywhere with a full-size refrigerator, apparently. Have you ever tried to lift a 1940s refrigerator? They are heavy as crap. So grandpa's platoon gets assigned to fridge duty. They haul it off the boat and up this giant hill where MacArthur was to be staying. No sooner do they get it up the hill than they get word that there's a possible air raid incoming, and the general needs to be evacuated to a facility at the bottom of the hill. And where MacArthur goes, so goes his fridge. Back down the hill they go. But then the air raid is a false alarm, and MacArthur goes back up the hill. Back up the hill they go. According to Grandpa, this happened a good 3-4 times during this one visit. So when MacArthur made that famous speech about "I shall return to the Philippines," Grandpa's response was, "I sure as heck hope not." Coco Chanel. I have recently only just found out she was apparently foreign agent who went under the code name Westminster. She spent most of World War II in Paris in the Ritz sleeping with foreign officers and had direct contact to Himmler and Goebbels. She even insisted all directors of her brand be removed. Edit. I can't spell. I think I read once that she used the anti-laws of the Vichy regime to force those who had bought some shares bit of the business back. She tried, but was outwitted. If memory serves, her Jewish business partners owned the right to her fragrances, but they were shrewd enough to sell their stake to a Gentile friend, so Chanel was unable to claim ownership when the foreign confiscated all people's property. After the war, the friend sold the stake back. She ended up getting a small stake in the end anyway, because the company feared a big trial would publicly reveal that Chanel had been a collaborator, which would have been bad for business. There's also some speculation that she wasn't more aggressively punished after the war because she knew unsavory things about the British royal family. Anyway, yeah, she was a monstrous person. Guy Fawkes. He was a minor cog in a conspiracy that he didn't even know all that much about. He was tasked with a dead simple objective, and he failed. He gave up the names of all the co-conspirators that he knew about, but most of them operated on a much higher level than this chump, so they got off mostly scot-free. He had one job and he messed up 3. Basically, he doesn't deserve the pages that his story is written on in history books. Lajos Kossoff. He's a Hungarian history figure who lived 1802 to 1894, but most notably he declared himself as governor-president of the Kingdom of Hungary during the 1848-49 revolution. For those of you who are not really familiar with Hungarian history, the short version is, we were fucked by everyone and never had independence since the early 1300s. This time we had beef with the Habsburgs. We really wanted independence, have Hungarian as the official language and the liberation of the serfdom. Sounds cool. Before the revolution the two most outstanding political figures were Kossoff and Count István Széchenyi. He's actually a really cool dude, and I think he deserved the title the greatest Hungarian. They both wanted the same things, but Kossoff wanted everything ASAP, whilst Chennai understood that change takes time. So of course they didn't like each other, with some other factors. Kossoff ended up bullying Chennai out of politics. I give Kossoff the credit for being smart and charismatic, who could motivate people with his speeches. So one time he basically started a rally amongst common folk, because other politicians told him that discrowning the king was a bad effing idea. But because of the massive amount of people surrounding them, they couldn't really say no. So they did discrown the king. During the revolution we sucked ass. Not getting into details, we had more downs than ups. Also some minorities revolted against Kossoff, who would not give them any rights. Enter one of my favorite historical figure, Arthur Gudgy. He was the greatest general in this whole scene, and finally he has his own exhibition. He actually won against some Austrian army corps. Kossoff hated him most likely because he feared his power and did everything to remove him from charge. But the Austrian King Ferdinand V asked the Russian Emperor Nicholas I for help. So, Hungary is a small country with a small population. Russia on the other hand, you see where this is going. Gudgy wanted to go west and destroy the Austrian army before the Russians arrive. Otherwise we're effed. Sounds great. Not for Kossoff. He wanted to wait until the two armies merge in the east because if they lose, he can emigrate to Turkey. The latter happened, and Kossoff as his last fucking move, stepped back from being governor president and appointed Gudgy. A few days later on the 13th of August, it was clear that Hungary had lost. In a hopeless situation, Gudgy signed a surrender at Villegas. Kossoff emigrated to Turkey, but tried to control everything from afar, writing the Cassandra letter, that if we make peace with the Austrians Hungary will no longer exist, which was foolishness. Our industry and agriculture fucking blossomed after. As a really great university professor once said, Kossoff threw a big rock up in the air and pushed Gudgy under it. Basically he threw him under the bus. What baffles me about this absolutely garbage of a person, that he has the biggest mausoleum in all of Hungary. It's made out of gold, marble and all that jazz. You know what Gudgy has? Oh effing black iron cross. God, I hate him so much. BTW, he died in Italy, and he still has a huge following because he was so great that every fucking town has to have at least one road named after him. Edit. Thank you for the silver kind stranger. Edit 2. Changed the swear words. Edit 3. Thank you for all the response I got. I didn't expect it to blow up. Thank you for the gold, platinum, everything. TLDR. Lajos Kossoff is a charismatic politician, becomes governor-president of Hungary during a revolution. His plan F's the whole nation, leaves everyone to deal with what he caused by running away to Turkey, acted like a know-it-all until he died, now has a huge following as the nation's hero, but he's basically a dummy. Not the most overrated, but first guy that comes to mind is America's only Paul Revere. Don't get me wrong. Yes, he was a good guy and he played a role in our nation's fate that night. But did you know he wasn't the only man on the midnight ride? A lot of the work and credit goes to his two peers that night. Revere only gets the credit because his name rhymed nicely in the poem written about him. I only know this because my grandma pointed out that we're related to one of the other two men, William Dawes. I'm too lazy to look up the other guy's name or how much of a role each of the three played in the event, but my basic memory tells me Revere wasn't the most critical player of the three. In fact, and I could be wrong, he got caught before he finished his role, which led the real heroism to one of the other two. So yeah, thanks Paul Revere, but let's give credit to the other guys who warned us of the British that night. We can't all have nice sounding names, though, so your name is remembered while the other two have been forgotten by most, other than historians and nerds. ETA, I didn't expect this to be seen or for it to get all this attention. Not replying to everyone, but there's some good history facts in here and I'm learning some things about him and others. US history, especially with regards to war, isn't my top interest. I'm liking the conversation and seeing some healthy debate. Sorry if I sounded undereducated on this topic as I don't know it in great detail. This is Reddit. This is my opinion. And that was mostly details from what I learned in K-12 school, but I'm done with my bachelor's now and K-12 was a long time ago. Also, this may be my top comment ever, so thank you everyone for the karma. but mostly the interesting facts and conversation here. I just had 100 plus notifications in my inbox yesterday and thought I marked them all as read, so I was really confused seeing all of this. 2 comments in 2 days hitting 6k plus karma. I just had a crummy night at the laundromat, so thank you for making that a little bit better. The order to sound the alarm was initially carried out by Revere and William Dawes riding together. In total, upon hearing from the 2 men, almost 50 other people ran or rode on horseback to alert the areas surrounding Concord and warn really any available loyal rebels. Revere and Dawes met up and rode with Samuel Prescott until they reached a British military roadblock. Prescott jumped a fucking wall on his horse to flee from the British. Dawes essentially faked out the troops pretending he would surrender, but prior to dismounting his horse, took off and was not captured, though he did fall from his horse and the escape and was injured. Revere was the only one captured during the roadblock. He took the opportunity to essentially psych out the soldiers by telling them that the rebel militia was going to overrun British soldiers marching on Concord. To verify his claim, he talked the soldiers into going to Lexington on their own with him in tow. When they reached the outskirts of Lexington, they heard the town bells ringing. Revere, using psychological warfare, convinced the British troops that they would soon be overrun and killed by militia. They freed all their prisoners and fled. So, yes, there were more people who rode to warn Concord Lexington that night, but Revere's, along with Prescott's and Dawes' stories, are by far the most eventful and most documented. The details of Sybil Ludington's ride almost 2 years later is conjecture, and the only data we have on it comes from her father's memoir, so could easily be exaggerated. Or, it's true, who knows. Tutankhamun, or King Tut as he is sometimes referred. He was a boy pharaoh that only reached the age of maybe 18, born from weird stuff and suffered scoliosis, a bad foot, walked with a cane, and contracted malaria, and likely died from an infection from a broken leg. Also, when he came to power, married his sister and had 2 miscarriages. This poor boy had lots of power, but was sick all his life, and likely his advisors made all decisions for him and eventually succeeded him. Also had a very short reign that ended with Egypt at war. They would lose under his successor. The randomness of life is crazy. Slightly off topic, but this anecdote sort of reminds me of how Bill Gates got rich. I listened to a podcast episode recently that went into details of how it happened. Microsoft was started as basically a consultant building apps for businesses. IBM decided they wanted to build their own PC and came to Microsoft to supply the OS for it. Twice Bill Gates turned them away to other companies that specialized in OSs, as Microsoft didn't have an OS and no clue how to build one. Through random circumstances, IBM was forced to come back to Microsoft, who just ended up buying an OS from a hobbyist, customizing it for IBM, calling it MS-DOS, and the rest of history. I don't know why, but the story of the archaeologist who was almost out of money and about to give up before stumbling on the tomb of what is arguably the most well-known Egyptian pharaoh who, by all rights, should have been forgotten to history long ago reminds me how unplanned life can be. I still haven't had my coffee, so I'm probably rambling. Yet, I was lucky enough to have an exhibit of his stuff at my local museum and was super surprised to hear a lot of this. We don't know much about him, but can guess that he was really young, not really loved or cared about by the people, apparently liked hunting and racing chariots and stuff. He seems like he was just a regular rich kid who had some advisors that ran the country and kept him out of politics and ruling. When he died under unknown circumstances, they did the bare minimum and he was entirely forgotten. Thousands of years later, some struggling archaeologist who was just barely getting by and had almost zero funding and was ready to give up and go home in disgrace was poking around somewhere lame and accidentally stumbled upon his tomb and was all, holy shit, look at all this amazing stuff. Who is this guy? I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm only 16, so I hope you didn't cringe from the editing. I hope we can get to 50,000 subscribers, because I wouldn't be here without all of you. So thank you so much for your time and energy, and please subscribe.